In the early days of New Orleans, newsboys would rush down this alleyway with bundles of newspapers under their arms.
Morning paper.
Their goal? Getting the paper into the hands of people on the streets. But the papers they sold were always changing. The Daily Picayune, the Times, the Democrat, States, and Item all eventually merged.
There were mergers left and right. It's just dizzying.
And now, decades after the last major merger when the Times Picayune joined with the States Item, history is repeating itself. The flag of the Times Picayune now flies with that of the New Orleans Advocate. The journey to today began on January 25, 1837. Francis Lumsden and George Wilkins Kendall published a 4-page newspaper they called the Picayune, named after a Spanish coin worth about 6 cents. Most of the newspaper activity at the time would center itself along the first blocks of Camp Street, an area that came to be known as Newspaper Row.
If you walked along here, you would hear the clattering away of these linotype machines. You would see journalists and reporters scurrying in and out, chatting in the streets.
The Picayune built itself a new home in the 300 block of Camp in 1850.
Right around this time, they cover the Mexican War and start developing a national reputation and a huge readership. They also start to develop a lot of competition. So other newspaper firms set up adjacently. There's the City Item, there's the States, there's the Times.
By 1914, the Picayune merged with the Times Democrat, itself the result of another merger, to become the Times Picayune. But the competition was far from over. The States printed here in what's today the Contemporary Arts Center until the Times Picayune bought it in 1933. A few blocks away on Perdido, just off of St. Charles, was the Item. This is all that's left of their building, and it's here they battled not only the States in the afternoon, but the Picayune in the morning with their short-lived Tribune. It was a good effort, just not good enough. Walter Cowan, who eventually was named editor of the States Item, got his start at the Item.
The Item was in hour-to-hour competition with the States of that time. And when I say hour-to-hour, each newspaper put out about 4 editions a day.
Oh, I'm telling you, competition was fierce. You won't believe it, but it was.
Jack Dempsey was a police reporter for the States and remembers the day in 1958 when things changed.
We became the States Item. They bought out the Item. Town Picayune bought the Item. But we were in fierce competition prior to that.
By 1968, the two papers moved from Lafayette Square into a sleek new plant along the Pontchartrain Expressway.
Why? Because it wanted access to the new interstates and highways that would get you out to the suburbs. That's where the readers were moving.
And while business was booming, the paper's reputations were far from stellar. The Picayune continued to refer to black people in derogatory terms and was lukewarm at best when it came to integration. The States Item mirrored its sister paper's views until publisher Ashton Phelps Sr. granted independence in the late 1960s.
The difference became crystal clear in 1972 when the Picayune endorsed President Nixon and the States Item endorsed George McGovern.
In the mid-70s, More, a journalism review, ranked the Picayune as one of the 10 worst papers in the country. Ads that look like news stories that read like ads, pitiful Washington coverage, no investigative reporting at all. Those were just some of the critiques.
The States Item was, I think, more aggressive. The Picayune was the newspaper of record.
And even though the States Item had become a more progressive paper, the staffs were slow to become diversified. But the quality of the paper began to improve. It was under Jim Amos when the Times-Picayune won its first Pulitzer Prizes in 1997. When Katrina made landfall, the newspaper was a lifeline for those marooned in the city, and for those displaced who got the latest reports about New Orleans almost instantly on NOLA.com.
We were getting 30 million hits a day on the website.
There was no denying the fact a change was headed to New Orleans.
The Pulitzers, the George Polk Award, the National Headliner Award could not immunize us against the internet. And that's the thing.
But change happened too soon. The city was outraged in 2012 when the Newhouse family, who bought the Picayune in 1962, announced it would cut daily publication and lay off 200 staffers as it focused more on digital publishing.
Advocate! Free
Enter the Advocate. The Manship family of Baton Rouge opened a small New Orleans office that ballooned when local businessman John Georges and his wife Dathel bought the Advocate. An old-fashioned newspaper war was on as the digital age dawned.
This was a microcosm of what print is going through.
And 7 years after they banked big on digital, the Newhouses sold the Times-Picayune and NOLA.com to the Georges. Now the flags of the New Orleans Advocate and Times-Picayune fly on page 1, the latest chapter in the story of New Orleans journalism. Danny Monteverde, Eyewitness News.